This was just an opportunity to give some of the money back to the people who earn it, and it failed because of Democratic leadership.
It appears there will be no tax cuts this year, and everyone is talking about it. At Issue starts right now. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. And we want you to share your opinions and comments with us. Just go to facebook.com/MPB Online News. On Twitter, our handle is @IssueMPB. Also visit our webpage, mpbonline.org. Well, it appears there will be no tax cut bill passed this year. Earlier this week, House Democrats blocked a hybrid bill of competing Republican proposals that would have eliminated parts of the personal income tax and about $550 million in business taxes over 15 years. The House did not have the 60% majority needed to pass the bill. Tax cuts were a cornerstone for Republicans this session, and they are not happy about their efforts being stonewalled. We spoke with Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate about the failure of the tax bill. But we start with Governor Phil Bryant, who is among those not pleased.
It's just a shame that the Democrats in the House of Representatives killed a tax cut bill that would have helped businesses, big and small, and stopped some money going back into the pockets of hardworking taxpayers. It's unfortunate the Republicans did all they could to pass that bill. They passed it in the Senate with a bipartisan vote. The Democratic leadership in the House killed it, and it's unfortunate, and I think they'll have to answer to the voters for it.
I'm not going to vote for any tax cut. I hadn't this year, and I'm not going to start now. My alma mater, Nettleton High School, has buses that have holes in them, roofs that are leaking. I will not do that. No, until I'm satisfied that our public school systems are funded. I have realigned my car twice in the last month due to potholes on state highways. And everybody's having that problem. So no, we're not going to talk. My district's not going to talk about tax cuts until we get these needs met. And when we do, then I'll sit down and hold hands and sing Kumbaya with the Republicans.
I think it was evident that the Republicans throughout this state, from the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the House of Representatives, want a tax cut. Give the people that send the money to Jackson, give everybody a pay raise. And that's what that tax cut yesterday was about. It also was a competitive thing with the franchise tax. We are only one of a few states that still has the antiquated franchise tax. It would make our small business people more competitive. So yesterday we separated the sheep from the goats about whether you're for it or against it. And I think it was a bright line that was shown.
It's political grandstanding. If they were serious about tax cuts to the business interests, they would have considered such proposals in the last 3 years. But all of a sudden this year, in the election year, all of a sudden, let's do everything we can to help our big supporters. And we cannot do that at the expense of our kids and at the expense of our roads and bridges and other vital state services.
Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, who introduced his own tax plan this year, released this statement. He says, quote, "The Senate passed this bill in a large bipartisan vote in an effort to simplify the tax code and encourage long-term economic growth. Hopefully, a few House Democrats will hear the cries of the people back home that need a little more money in their pockets to provide for their families." End quote. We're getting a lot of reaction to this on our Facebook page. Here's what some of you had to say about it. Emily Etheridge Branch says, "As long as the legislature continues to cite budget shortfalls as the reason for not fully funding education, I am opposed to bills that would cut taxes." Carl Davis writes, "This is the way I figure it. High taxes, more handouts. Less taxes, less handouts. If higher taxes went to better roads and law enforcement, I wouldn't mind paying it. But obviously that's not happening in Mississippi." And Sarah Asmus says, "This legislation would not help most Mississippians very much, if at all. We are the poorest state, last in everything. A real tax break would be a reduction or elimination of the grocery tax. Not everyone makes enough money to pay income taxes, but everyone eats." Education is also taking center stage this week. The Senate passed a House measure to increase the education budget to $2.5 billion. It's the most money for education in state history. The increase in funding is about $110 million for K-12 schools, but the total amount of money is still $200 million short of what's required by the state education funding formula. We spoke with Governor Bryant, Democratic Senator Kenny Wayne Jones, and Republican Senator Terry Burton about the bill.
This bill, it's $2.5 billion, 2.2 of that goes to MAEP, but that's still about $200 million short of full funding of the program. What do you say to people who are criticizing the lawmakers about that?
Well, I'll say this. MAEP is not the total education budget. It's a part of the budget. Is it underfunded? Yes, it is. But MAEP is a component, it's a formula that distributes funds to the school districts, and they determine how those funds are spent. On the outside of MAEP, we put $252 million new dollars outside of MAEP in the last 4 years, going straight to the classroom. Things like early childhood education, the third grade reading gate, those types of things, coaches for the third grade readers. These are the type of things that we put into the classroom itself outside of the formula that wouldn't have gotten there if they had been funded inside the formula. The formula is $211 million short of being fully funded. We put $252 million new dollars in the last 4 years into education. Do the math.
Do you think that the funding bill itself was adequate for this year?
Well, you could say, you could be an opponent or a proponent of that, but we had to do something. So I'm just glad that they put something out there, even if it takes 3 years for us to look at funding that. I still think it's a step in the right direction. We need to do more. In the election year, there was some politics involved in that, so we just have to look at it for what it is, go with that, but we did take a step in the right direction.
Do you think it's going to be 3 or 4 years before MAEP is fully funded?
Depends on where the budget is, depending on how we watch the budget. If we watch the budget like we're supposed to do, we might be able to do it in 2. But 3 is fine, long as there's a commitment to do it.
What do you think of the bill?
Well, of course, it's early in the process, and so that's a little bit unusual. I think the House wanted to go to conference and do some adjusting to it. I'm perfectly fine with where the bill is at now. There are other opportunities there to add some additional money, like Jobs for American Graduates, which I chair nationally. I hope we'll be able to do more of that. I'm certainly comfortable with signing this early version of the funding bill and seeing if there's additional support that we can give, like teacher assistants, I think, for example, is another debate that we're having out there that need additional funding for the salaries for teacher assistants. It's unusual, but it's certainly not unprecedented.
And this brings us to our At Issue Roundtable. Austin Barber is a Republican strategist. He's the founding partner of Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney and executive director of a political action committee called the Mississippi Democratic Trust. And gentlemen, we welcome you back to At Issue. Glad to have you both with us. Let's start with you, Austin. It sounds like the Republicans on education are saying it's a lot of money, it's the most you're going to get, you should be happy. Is that essentially the message?
Well, I don't know that it's with that tone. To be quite candid, Brandon thinks this is funny. I don't know. I think that I think when you're talking about 110 million, I think it was like 109.9 million more dollars this year for K through 12 than last year. We're talking about $2.52 billion out of the general fund that's going for education. So I don't think Republicans have quite that tone. Listen, we are funding education at a record level. We're very proud of that, and that happened under Republican leadership.
Brendan, it is a lot of money. Are Democrats too focused on this MAEP formula, and it's not enough unless it's that much?
Well, you know, I'm an English major, but I find myself teaching Republicans increasingly about economics. It's called inflation, and we are still $200 million short of accounting for inflation. And so this number, when we say it's the largest in state history, that's a bit of a misnomer because we're not keeping up with the needs. Look, 80% of our school districts have had to raise taxes at the local level. We have 2,000 fewer teachers than we did in 2008, even though student population has stayed the same. And so the question that we're underfunding is really no question at all. And yeah, the formula still stands. What we said back when that formula was passed is that that is what it takes to be adequate. That's what it takes to do the basic things that we must do. and we're falling short of that.
You know, we have obviously a legislature from the past who created the MAEP formula, and I am no expert on MAEP and not going to try to act like I am. But what I know is, and what voters across the state and what parents across the state, which is most important, who have their kids in public school, will be able to see is that their school districts, their schools, are going to get record amount of money. Their kids' teachers are going to get their pay raise funded, about $40 million into the teacher pay raise this year. Again, $2.52 billion. That's always a lot of money from where I come from in Yazoo City, $2.52 billion. About 40 to 45% of the whole general budget. But of course, it's not enough for people like Nancy Loom, who want to send emails begging her constituents to call the governor and say, please veto this. We did not get enough money. I'm not quite sure what is enough, or will there ever be enough for this lady, but apparently this is not.
But it's, Austin, it's a little bit of a cheap shot because all of these budget numbers look like crazy money to those of us who are working for a living. But the point is, we've got an obligation to do the best we can by our students. And so if we're not able to do that, we just heard from Representative Holland, holes in the buses, holes in the ceilings. Look, that's unacceptable. We just can't accept that as an outcome. And you know, we talk about business and job production. No one wants to move to a place that they don't want to live, that they don't want to send their kids to school, and that's what we're creating.
I agree. Education is so important. That's why Republicans are taking care of it. Even when you look at the special needs bill, is waiting to be concurred for in the Senate. I'm sure they'll come up with the right type of final language, send that to the governor. Again, happened under Republican leadership. Representative Crawford, Senator Collins, of course, from the Tupelo area. They work very hard to take care of these special needs kids, to be able to have a voucher for them to help them get a better situation that they are in now.
Kenneth Wayne Jones said there, you heard from him, Brandon, saying it's a step in the right direction. Do you think Democrats are hopeful that next year we'll have even more record funding for schools, even if it's not all the way to MAEP?
Senator Kenny Wayne Jones should get the Diplomacy Award for the state Senate this week for saying something nice. Look, as you can tell, Democrats in the House and Senate did ultimately vote for what they thought was to continue working on these things as they do with all appropriations bills. One thing we haven't said yet is that this bill has already been sent to the governor, which is a procedural thing, but it's very unusual. Typically, all of these appropriation bills kind of stay in the process for a while so that as money is calculated, as new money comes in, they can make funding a little bit bigger. This was a tactic. They sent it in there so that they could freeze it, so that Republicans could say, hey, we did what we could, take a victory lap and close the door. And that was kind of a little bit of sleight of hand.
The governor himself said that was a little unusual.
Voters, parents, they don't care about parliamentarian tricks. They care about record funding, and that's what they're going to show when they go to vote in August in the primaries and then again in November in the general election.
All right, let's move on to the tax cut proposals. You mentioned election year. There have been a lot of allegations that this only came up, this idea of these competing tax cut proposals. Who's got the best tax cut proposal is an election year tactic. I'm sure, Austin, you would argue it was not, and Brandon, you would argue it is. But at the end of the day, we might not have a tax cut at all. And are you surprised by that, Brandon?
I don't know. I don't know if things played out this week the way that I anticipated. I didn't expect to have this hybrid bill come out of the Senate. So just taking the political hat off for a minute, it was an unusual week. I think that Lieutenant Governor Reeves was probably a little confounded by House action. I think the House clearly wanted to kind of show its own independence and have its own bill. It was pretty obvious that Republicans in those two chambers weren't talking before the session because they had two very different ideas about how to get there. But look, it's absolutely election year politics. But more importantly than that, it's not a tax cut. It's a tax shift. Again, basic economics. You don't cut taxes at the state level and not have to raise taxes at the local level. And every time we go out and brag about these legislative tax cuts, we always see the school board increasing millage. We always see the boards of supervisors having to do the same. And so it's a little bit disingenuous, and I think that at the end of the day, we're where we ought to be with respect to that issue because we still have significant needs that are not being met.
I think tax cuts for this year are likely dead at the legislature, which is disappointing. You know, the Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, passed the bill 40-11, sort of the compromise bill that Brandon mentioned. And then when it went to the House, the vote on Wednesday, you had 52 Democrats who basically killed the bill. There was one Democrat, Representative Cockerham, who did vote yes. But listen, if that's their position, that's their position. Obviously, the Republicans are on the total philosophical different side of the aisle, believe that tax cuts will help grow the economy. Mississippi State said with this tax bill it would increase jobs by about 3,514 jobs over a 10-year period. But you know, it was going to be the largest tax cut in state history, $555 million. But the Democrats chose to be against it, and it's now turned into a political issue, which, like most things do, and voters will have to figure this one out during the general elections in November.
That had to be the baseball coach at Mississippi State, because nobody that teaches economics or anything about state government would have said that. Nobody thinks this was a good idea. No third party looked at this and said, you know what Mississippi needs right now? It needs to cut its funding. That would make it a lot better. Nobody said that.
I'm an Ole Miss grad, but I'm not going to dog a Mississippi State study like my partner over there. And I don't think the baseball coach did it. I think probably some pretty smart economics professors worked on this.
They got to waste their tenure now, Austin.
Well, that's an issue for you to deal with them. But listen, this would have helped, over 1 million individuals. I've heard some Democrats say, "Oh, this is just a helping hand for the big corporations and so forth." That's not true. It would have helped over 1 million individuals to lower their individual tax burden, some greater than others. But listen, again, this is going to be an issue for November. Democrats who are running for governor, lieutenant governor, all the way down to legislative races will have to handle this issue, and they'll have the thanks to the Democrats in the House to have to deal with this issue.
Just real quick, the average tax savings under this plan for the lowest 20% of earners in the state of Mississippi was around $114. By the time you've realigned your tires twice, by the time you've had to pay for a local school board tax increase, by the time you've had to pay for all variety of things that aren't being provided for you by your state, that money is sucked up and gone. We ought to just focus on being a good state and then worry about that stuff.
Brandon and his allies in the Democrat Party feel like whether it's $114 or $1,114, that government knows how to spend that money better than individuals. Myself personally and Republicans feel that I'd rather put that money in individuals' pockets and let them decide how they want to spend that money.
Just a few seconds left, but Austin, if the next year's not an election year, if the tax cut bill fails this year, will they try to bring it back next year?
Oh, I'm certain that they will. I'm certain, and I couldn't imagine they would. Sorry, I'm at a loss for words with that because I think the answer is an obvious yes.
And he even said it with a straight face. Of course they won't.
I said they will.
No, I'm saying of course they won't. But you managed to pull it off.
Well, we'll see, and we'll have you guys back next year, and we'll talk about it then and see where we are at that point.
Thank you.
In the meantime, we still have a session that's not over yet, and we'll continue to follow what else happens.
Sure.
Austin and Brandon, thank you both for joining us on that issue. Well, lawmakers recognized the Department of Health this week for its efforts to immunize school children. The state health officer, Dr. Mary Currier, led a group of health professionals receiving special recognition by the state. Mississippi has the highest kindergarten vaccination rate in the nation, and it's a requirement for Mississippi children entering school. We spoke with Dr. Currier about the efforts by the state, clinics, and physicians to immunize children.
We have a really good, strong public health law regarding school entry vaccinations where we assure that children are vaccinated as long as they don't have a medical reason for not being vaccinated. Of course, if they have a medical reason, they're not vaccinated. But because of that, we vaccinate almost all of our kids before they get into school.
This is kind of a far cry from where the Senate or the legislature was earlier this year when they were talking about opening up anti-vaccination or exemptions to conscious objection or religious grounds. Do you think that this is kind of a recognition that maybe that was a bad idea?
Well, I hope so. I think people really want to be able to choose what they do for and with their children, which I understand. But for this particular issue, whether or not their children are vaccinated also affects the children and adults and infants around those children. So it really is important that everybody be vaccinated.
Where does the state go from here on vaccinations?
we'll just keep plugging away and try and do the best we can. We have some areas where we need to work. We've got some areas like adolescent immunizations, making sure that they're appropriately vaccinated, and older adults that we need to work on. So we'll be doing that as well.
The vaccination rate for kindergartners last school year was 99.7%. World-famous astronaut and Biloxi native Fred Hayes was honored by state lawmakers this week. Hayes was at the Capitol as part of a delegation from the Stennis Space Center showcasing Mississippi's role in the space industry. Hayes was in the Apollo space program and was the lunar module pilot on the fateful Apollo 13 mission in 1970. The mission was to land on the moon, but it was blown off course after an oxygen tank explosion in the lunar service module. Mission Control and the three-man crew in space raced against the clock to find a way to return safely to Earth.
Well, Apollo 13 was a mission with a peculiar problem, one that we could envision happen, an explosion. And it was kind of put us in the whole system in a precarious position, because with explosions, our failure mean effects analysis said if you ever had one, you're going to lose the vehicle and the crew. So they were in a position where they had to work through and develop really in real time new ways to do things, because this had not been planned to have to be catered for. All credible failures, we had a combination of on board or mission control people had readied procedures to handle those problems. But this non-credible failure put the system in a bind. There had to be a lot of invention done over 4 days to figure out how to do things that had never been planned to be done to get us back. So it was a scramble.
Well, I'm sure it was also nerve-wracking.
Not really. We were busy initially troubleshooting. The biggest emotion I felt was disappointment. I was sick to my stomach. Trained through 2 previous missions to get ready to go. Didn't get to fly as a backup. And then I got to fly and hoped to land on the moon, and I lost the chance. So I was just a sick feeling in my pit of my stomach when this happened.
But he got home so safely. The Apollo 13 mission will mark its 45th anniversary on April 11th. MPB's Paul Boger joins us now to talk about what's been happening at the Capitol and what is to come. Paul, good to have you with us as always.
Glad
Let's talk
to be
about education. There's been a lot of back and forth. You heard it just a minute ago.
Lots of back and forth, not just here, but in the legislature as well. You know, it's been a contentious week on education. The reason is because a lot of this animosity is coming from House lawmakers who seem a little agitated that this bill wasn't sent back to them to go to conference. It is a very common legislative procedure to send large appropriations bills, in education being amongst the largest, back to their originating House so there can be conference, so there can be negotiations. And you have to remember that there's a revised budget estimate that's supposed to come out next week, or is scheduled to come out next week, that could have put more money into education. So there's kind of some concern that maybe, you know, schools were kind of left out a little bit.
So if that happens, they can't go back and change it.
There are some vehicles, I'm being told, that they can maybe put a little bit more money towards education, but it's pretty much locked in. That's the amount that's going to be there.
All right. Well, so in that same vein, these the moves this week on graduation tests, these exams that have been required before you can graduate, they changed that up a little bit.
Yeah, and you know, and that wasn't actually in the legislature this week. It was actually from the State Board of Education. But this is a bill that was in the legislature just a few weeks ago until the board said, you know what, we'll take care of this, and they decided to get rid of the graduation exam. A lot of people said that it wasn't quite fair to place all this pressure on kids to ace one exam, or actually 4 exams, in order for them to graduate. They're going to actually put these in with the final grade of a senior in high school and let them take the test that way, so it'll reflect in their grade, not so much just this one-time exam.
So I guess the intent there is to look at their overall achievement and abilities, and not just as it relates to that one.
Right, and that's exactly it.
All right, let's talk about this public hearing on the Department of Corrections. This task force has been meeting regularly. They heard from the public today.
They did hear from the public, and you know, this task force was originally scheduled to look at the corruption that occurred because of contracts within the Corrections Commission, and that it's kind of not, I won't say it's evolved into a different, maybe some corruption that's going on within the prisons, within the jails themselves. You know, a lot of parents of inmates came today talking about how they're having to send money to their son or their daughter via the number on a gift card over the telephone, and so they don't get beaten up or stabbed or killed even. And it's pointed to maybe there's maybe some more corruption in the Department of Corrections than just, at the top.
Interesting. Well, and I guess that all comes out in a process like this, which was their intent from the beginning. These tax cuts, it's been a lot to watch with all the back and forth. And are you surprised that we might end the legislative session without a tax cut?
I really thought there was going to be a tax cut. I thought there was going to be some deal worked out in the 11th hour that these tax cuts would come to fruition. But they're not. Democrats, reporters knew relatively early in the day that maybe, just maybe, that the Democrats had the votes to actually block it. And it was true. Republicans are quite furious about it. But, this isn't exactly the end. There may be some sort of deal worked out to where the income tax cuts themselves may be able to come back, but the franchise tax, which was the biggest part of the tax cut, which was the part really being pushed by the lieutenant governor and Republican leadership, that's dead because of procedural votes or procedure in the House of Representatives.
So don't call time of death on the whole thing just yet.
Just yet, but for the most part, it's looking likely.
Okay, let's talk about these inspection stickers. The $5 inspection that you're supposed to get every year. That's finally, those are dead now, it seems.
Those are as good as dead. All that's left is to be signed by the governor. But, most people are really happy about this particular law going away. It's being seen as it's been a nuisance for a lot of Mississippians. I mean, most people don't even get these stickers inspected or don't even get their cars inspected.
Or there are places where you can go and get the sticker where they don't do the inspection.
Yeah, the inspection's cursory. It's been a hassle for everybody. They're ready to see him go.
Well, the governor is expected to sign that one as well. Paul Boger, thank you. And thank you for joining us for At Issue. We'll see you again next week.